Elias Thorne lived by the tide and the clock. His workshop, a cinder-block fortress against the relentless coastal wind, sat at the end of what locals called the South Spur, a private, concrete and timber access road that jutted out 50 yards into the choppy waters of the inlet. This road was not a public access point. It was his lifeline, his personal shipyard, and the only path by which he could haul equipment, launch his restored fishing vessels, and, most importantly, deliver the meticulously crafted marine parts that kept his small business afloat. The rules were simple, and they were painted in stark, clear English on 5 separate signs. Private access. Towing enforced. Vehicles will be moved at owner's expense. Do not block. The signs had meant nothing to Veronica Hayes. She'd moved into the newly renovated condo complex, overlooking the spur 3 weeks ago. Her arrival was announced by the glaring white Mercedes GLE, which, from the moment she unloaded her designer luggage, treated Elias's access way like her personal valet stand. The first time, Elias had been polite, even apologetic for bothering her. "Ma'am, I know parking is tied up by the complex, but you're blocking the only heavy-duty route here. I need this clear for safety." Veronica, who favored oversized sunglasses and a permanent look of mild offense, hadn't even rolled down the window more than an inch. Yes, I'm just waiting for my dry cleaning delivery. 5 minutes tops. Can't you just squeeze by?" The 5 minutes had become 30. Elias had to drag a 500-pound engine block around her bumper, risking his back and scratching the pristine white paint of the Mercedes, a small, deeply satisfying scrape that he pretended not to notice. The second time, he left a sharply worded note, laminated and stuck directly under the wiper blade. "This is a working maritime road. Blocking this space is trespassing. Consider this your final warning." The third time was this morning. He walked out of his shop, coffee steam still curling around his fingers, and stopped dead. Her car, the same arrogant white GLE, was positioned perfectly to kill his day. It was parked just past the do not block line, leaving exactly 1 foot less than the width required to maneuver the custom flatbed trailer he needed to attach to his Ford F-250. Elias checked his watch. 9:05 a.m. In 4 hours, he was supposed to meet Mr. Chen, a client flying in from Seattle to demonstrate the newly repaired stabilizers on the Ocean's Promise. That demonstration was worth $20,000, a sum that would pay for a new roof on the crumbling workshop. Miss the meeting, and the contract vanished. Elias's jaw tightened. This wasn't just inconvenience. This was economic sabotage. He walked up to the driver's window and pounded once, hard. The car was empty. He checked the passenger side. Empty. He could see a discarded paper coffee cup and a gym bag. This wasn't a quick errand. This was a statement. He pulled out his phone, calling the only tow company available in the secluded area, South Spur Marine Works. "Yeah? I need a tow. Obstruction. White Mercedes GLE. License plate GR8 fuel. Yeah, right now," the dispatcher's voice, a gravelly sound of experience, came back slow. "Ah, the new folks by the condos? Look, Elias, we only got the one heavy rig free and it's up by the bridge 60 minutes out. Maybe 70? Can you wait?" 70 minutes. That put him over the window for preparing the Ocean's Promise for the demonstration. Mr. Chen was notoriously rigid about time. Elias rubbed the stubble on his chin, his mind working furiously. He knew the layout of the complex. Veronica was probably in the yoga studio or having an expensive brunch, oblivious to the world outside her $8 latte. He grabbed a small, heavy piece of scrap metal, a piece of rusted anchor chain, and walked back to the car. He looked at the window. He looked at the flawless white side panel. He felt the pure, hot impulse to shatter the glass, key the paint, and leave the note inside the mess. But that was vandalism. That was petty, illegal, and easily traced. Elias Thorne was not petty. He was a man of consequences. He took a deep breath, dropping the chain. No, there was a better way. A way that delivered the lesson without leaving a paper trail of malice, only of poor choices and bad physics. He unlocked the chain-link fence protecting his specialized equipment shed. Inside, among the massive boat lifts and hydraulic levers, was a set of heavy-duty, low-profile vehicle dollies the kind used to delicately shift high-value cars in tight spaces. Beside them, his pride and joy, a custom-built, electrically powered winch system rated for 11 tons, usually used for pulling damaged hulls off the rocks. Elias had spent years studying the South Spur. He knew the structural reports, the tide charts, and the geological composition of the subsoil. Specifically, he knew the very end of his private concrete section terminated not in solid, load-bearing ground, but in a 20-year-old, cantilevered section of dock intended only for pedestrian and light utility traffic. It was clearly marked on the original blueprints he had kept in his office. Max load 3,500 lbs. The Mercedes GLE was a hefty machine, often weighing in excess of 4,800 pounds empty. Elias worked with the methodical fury of a craftsman denied his craft. He attached the heavy-duty dollies to the front and rear axles of the GLE. The parking brake she'd assumed was invincible. It was not. The tires lifted a fraction of an inch, enough for the low-friction wheels to engage. The silent mechanical transfer of weight was eerie. He ran the thick, reinforced steel cable from his winch, carefully threading it under the car, attaching the hooks to the heavy-duty dollies. He checked the time. 9:45 a.m., 75 minutes until Mr. Chen arrived. He had plenty of time. Elias returned to the control panel, his hands steady. He engaged the winch. A low, powerful filled the air, cutting through the sound of the gulls. The Mercedes, silent, sleek, and utterly helpless, began to slide. Inch by inch, the expensive SUV, the symbol of her arrogant disregard, rolled down the final section of the concrete spur. He guided it perfectly, slowing the winch, checking the angles. He didn't move it off the spur. He moved it onto the cantilevered dock section, right up to the very edge of the final piling. It was exactly 10 a.m. when he disengaged the winch. The Mercedes now rested entirely on the weak, stressed concrete pad. The vehicle dollies were still attached, its weight perfectly centered on the most vulnerable part of the aged structure. Elias stood back, wiping sweat from his brow, a chilling sense of inevitability settling over him. He walked over, removed his laminated final warning note from the hood, and placed it neatly on the driver's seat. He then walked 20 feet back to the main concrete access way, grabbed a sledgehammer from his tool chest, and aimed it at the largest timber support beam of the failing cantilever. He didn't need to destroy the structure. He just needed to introduce a fatal instability. The first swing was a dull, echoing thwump against the thick wood. The concrete under the Mercedes remained still. The second swing was cleaner, striking the beam where the wood was weakest, already scarred by decades of salt and moisture. The third swing was the one that did it. The beam cracked, a long tearing sound of aged wood giving way. For a moment, nothing happened. The Mercedes GLE, symbol of entitlement, hung suspended over the cold gray water, seemingly defiant. Then, slowly at first, like a deep sigh of exhaustion, the cantilevered section of the dock began to give. The crack wasn't a break. It was a surrender. A heavy grinding tear echoed off the water as the weight of the massive, empty SUV finally defeated the decaying concrete. Elias watched, his expression unreadable as the dock under the Mercedes split diagonally, the entire vehicle tilting violently toward the sea. The powerful beat came not from a crash, but from the sound of the driver's side door, still locked, popping open a fraction of an inch from the torsion, and then the heavy, expensive machine, the emblem of a life that never had to respect boundaries, began its slow, inevitable slide into the murky, waiting water. It was silent, cinematic, and the price of ignoring the signs was paid in full. He looked up at the condo complex. He saw a flash of white movement, Veronica now on her balcony, latte in hand, just catching the tail end of the spectacle. A scream, high and thin, followed, swallowed instantly by the relentless roar of the ocean. Elias felt no guilt, only the chilling satisfaction of a boundary finally enforced. He picked up his sledgehammer and walked back to his truck, the flatbed trailer now accessible. He had a $20,000 contract to save. The Mercedes was still submerging, its headlights like wide, terrified eyes, shining up through the water as the first fish swam into the shadow of the now sunken SUV. Elias had just secured the trailer to his F-250 when the sound of running heels hammered against the main concrete spur. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The high-pitched, ragged screech had already confirmed it, a sound of pure, entitled distress that echoed between the steel hulls of the neighboring boats. He looked at his watch. 10:15 a.m. He was tight on time. You monster! Veronica's voice cracked, closer now, fueled by adrenaline and utter disbelief. Elias finished securing the winch cable and looped it neatly over the hood. He finally turned. Veronica stood 20 feet away, her workout clothes soaked at the hem from splashing through the shallow tide pool near the dock. Her expensive sunglasses were gone, revealing wide manic eyes. "It's gone! My car, what did you do? You moved it! Where is it?" she screamed, pointing a trembling manicured finger at the jagged, empty space where the dock had been. Elias walked slowly toward her, his face a mask of weary professionalism. He stopped exactly on the private property line, placing himself on his territory. "Ms. Hayes," he said, his voice low and devoid of inflection, "I repeatedly warned you about blocking a working marine access way. I left you 3 notes. I tried to call a tow truck this morning, but they had a 60-minute delay. I have a critical $20,000 contract demonstration in an hour. I don't care about your demonstration. That is a brand new Mercedes. You are telling me you had it towed? Where is the impound lot? I want it back now." Elias gestured with an open hand toward the dark, churning water 20 yards beyond her. "I moved it. I moved it to the only space you left available. The old cantilever section, which, as noted on the signs that you disregarded, is not rated for heavy loads." Veronica followed his gaze, finally comprehending the extent of the disaster. The white roof of her SUV was barely visible now, a ghostly, submerged shape only a foot below the surface. A few plastic bags, remnants of her gym gear, floated around the small wreckage. A gasp escaped her, raw and primal. No. You pushed it! You deliberately destroyed my car. I applied force to the vehicle to move it off my access road, Elias corrected her, his tone maddeningly precise. I used my professional equipment to shift it to the only open adjacent space, a section of dock clearly not intended for vehicles. It appears the structural integrity of that unmarked, unposted, and unauthorized parking spot was compromised by a vehicle weighing approximately 4,800 pounds, exceeding the 3,500-pound load limit of that cantilever section. It seems to have been an unfortunate consequence of poor judgment regarding private maritime regulations. The lie was so layered with technical truth and selective omission that it felt cleaner than any confession. He had not pushed it. He had put it in a position where physics and engineering guaranteed a failure. He hadn't destroyed the car. Her gross negligence in where she demanded it be parked had destroyed the dock, which then sank her car. The sheer cold-blooded calculation paralyzed Veronica's rage. She stumbled backward, pulling out her phone. "You are going to regret this. You have no idea who I am. My husband is Gregory Hayes. He's a partner at Vandross, Hayes & Pierce. You will be sued for every penny you possess, you dock rat." "I look forward to discussing the matter with Mr. Hayes," Elias said, stepping around her. He climbed into his truck and started the engine. "But right now, I have a client who pays his invoices on time. Unlike some people, my business depends on respecting schedules." He pulled the flatbed trailer onto the spur, executed a tight 3-point turn, and headed down the road. In his rearview mirror, he saw not only Veronica screaming into her phone, but also the first flashing blue lights of a patrol car rounding the bend. The demonstration with Mr. Chen went perfectly. Elias, adrenaline still humming, performed flawlessly, explaining the stabilizer's mechanics with sharp focus. The roar of the inboard diesel engine drowned out the distant wail of sirens, and the gentle rocking of the ocean's promise erased the image of the sunken Mercedes. Mr. Chen, a small man with a meticulous mustache, shook his hand firmly. "Excellent work. Mr. Thorne, I will have the wire transfer processed by tomorrow morning. $20,000, as agreed. Contract secured. Justice served." Elias allowed himself a grim smile of victory. The smile faded instantly when he pulled his truck back onto the South Spur at 1:30 p.m. The scene was mayhem. Not only was the police cruiser there, but also a fire department truck, presumably to deal with potential fuel leakage, and a shiny black Escalade with tinted windows. Clearly, the transportation for Gregory Hayes. Gregory Hayes was exactly as intimidating as Veronica's screams had promised. Tailored suit, expensive watch, and a face set in the hard lines of a man who dealt in the ruin of others. He stood beside a uniformed officer, pointing dramatically toward the water. Elias parked and walked straight toward the officer, a thin, tired-looking man named Detective Miller. "Detective, I'm Elias Thorne, owner of South Spur Marine Works. That's my private access road. I'd like to know why I can't get to my workshop." Hayes immediately turned, his eyes, cold, blue, and utterly ruthless, locking onto Elias. "You are the animal who did this?" "You are the man who intentionally engineered the destruction of a $500,000 vehicle?" "Mr. Hayes," Elias returned, keeping his voice steady, "I am the man who had his business operations crippled for 3 weeks by your wife's repeated illegal parking on my private working road. The vehicle was parked on a dock structure clearly designated as non-load-bearing, and the signs forbidding parking were ignored." Detective Miller stepped between them, holding up a hand. "Mr. Thorne, we have a clear criminal damage complaint here. Mr. Hayes' wife claims you pushed her car into the water after she parked it. Is that true?" Elias pulled a copy of the original dock blueprints from his back pocket, the one detailing the load limits. He handed them to the detective. "I utilize professional, low-friction vehicle dollies to relocate the obstruction to an available space on my property, which, according to these 1998 municipal plans, has a maximum load of 3,500 pounds. Her vehicle exceeds that by over half a ton. I can confirm I removed the obstacle so I could conduct critical, time-sensitive commerce. The resulting failure was a catastrophic structural collapse due to gross and prolonged overload, not malicious physical force." Hayes scoffed. "Structural collapse? You were seen with a sledgehammer, you lunatic. We have witnesses from the condo tower." Elias's pulse spiked, but his voice remained flat. "I was clearing debris from an adjacent timber beam that was compromised by the failure, Mr. Hayes. That beam was a hazard. I can provide the logs from my winch, showing the measured, steady speed of the relocation. There was no push or ramming, just a calculated movement onto a failing, overloaded structure." Miller looked from the blueprints to the submerged car, then back to Elias. The difference between structural overload and criminal intent was a chasm. He squinted at Elias. "Mr. Thorne, I'm seizing your equipment for evidence. The winch, the dollies, everything. And I'm going to need you to come down to the station for a detailed statement. This is not going away. The legal weight of the situation, the freezing of his tools, the police interview, the implied threat of being charged with corporate vandalism or reckless endangerment finally hit Elias. He had won the parking war, but the actual battle had just begun. He sighed. "Understood, Detective. I'll cooperate fully. But if my equipment is seized for more than 24 hours, the financial damages will start accruing against the city, as I have just signed a major contract that requires those tools." Hayes stepped forward, a triumphant, viperous smile finally twisting his lips. "I'm glad you mentioned that contract, Mr. Thorne, because I have just issued an emergency order, a temporary restraining order, against you and your business, citing potential environmental damage from the submerged vehicle. Everything related to South Spur Marine Works is frozen. Your bank accounts, your property, and yes, that new $20,000 wire transfer, it's going to hit a brick wall, pending an investigation into the full extent of the structural damage, the environmental cleanup, and the market value of a brand new Mercedes GLE." The air went cold. Elias looked at the black Escalade, at the ruin of the dock, and at the man who had just weaponized the legal system against him. He had sought justice, and he had found a far more dangerous consequence: an escalating war against a man who could turn the very foundations of his livelihood into a liability. Hayes leaned in, his voice dangerously quiet. "I'm going to own this whole rotten little spur, Thorne, and you will be paying for my wife's inconvenience for the rest of your miserable life." The powerful beat. The $20,000 contract that was supposed to save his business had just been leveraged into a trap by Gregory Hayes, turning Elias's moment of triumph into a declaration of economic war. The silence of the marine shop was deafening. It was 4 p.m. Detective Miller and the police team had finished their work, placing bright yellow crime tape around the winch and the low-profile dollies before hauling them away on a flatbed. They had given Elias a receipt for the seized property and a summons to appear at the precinct the next morning. The reality of the temporary restraining order, TRO, was setting in like a freezing tide. Elias's bank had called, a curt, automated voice informing him that all accounts associated with South Spur Marine Works, the operating funds, the payroll, the small savings for his daughter's college fund, were now frozen, pending judicial review. The $20,000 wire transfer from Mr. Chen was a digital ghost, trapped in limbo. Elias sat on his workbench, head in his hands, breathing in the familiar scent of salt, oil, and rust. Gregory Hayes hadn't just sued him for damages. He had leveraged a half-sunken car into a legal siege, aiming to choke the very life out of Elias's business. This wasn't about a parking spot anymore. It was about the crushing power of the wealthy and the ruthless ability of a man like Hayes to turn justice into a weapon. He needed a lawyer, and fast. But lawyers who fought partners at Vandross, Hayes, and Pierce charged more per hour than Elias made in a week. He didn't call the sleek, expensive firms he found online. Instead, he drove to the shabby, brick-faced office building downtown, the kind of place where the linoleum was cracked and the coffee was black acid. He found the name he was looking for on a hand-lettered plaque, Clara Reed, Maritime Law and Litigation. Locals called her Claw Reed, not because she was a predator, but because once she got her hooks into a case, she never let go. Clara Reed was short, wiry and probably 55, with a sharp, intelligent face framed by a wild shock of graying red hair. Her office smelled faintly of old paper and ozone. She leaned back in a chair that groaned under her weight, a chipped mug of coffee in one hand, reading the stack of documents Elias had laid out, the TRO, the police report, the blueprints, and the photo of the Mercedes disappearing into the water. "So let me get this straight. Mr. Thorne," Clara said without looking up. Her voice was like gravel poured over silk. "This woman, Veronica Hayes, repeatedly ignored explicit warning signs on your private access road for weeks, impeding your ability to conduct business. Yes. And when she did it this morning, you had a $20,000 contract on the line, and the only tow truck was an hour away. Is that right?" "Yes, ma'am." "So you used your industrial winch equipment to relocate the vehicle from your access road to an adjacent, clearly deteriorating piece of dock structure that you knew, by way of the original municipal blueprints, was not rated for the vehicle's weight." Clara finally looked up, her gaze piercing. "And you did this knowing the structural failure was a near certainty." Elias swallowed, the dry air scratching his throat. "It was the only space available on my property that wasn't blocking my operations, and it was marked as non-load-bearing in the public records for anyone to see. My action was the removal of an obstruction. The sinking was a structural consequence. Technical truth, Thorne, I like it, but a prosecutor will call it premeditated criminal mischief and maybe corporate vandalism. Now tell me about the sledgehammer." Elias hesitated, feeling the weight of the confession. I gave the main timber support beam 3 hits. Not enough to bring it down, but enough to introduce a fatal weakness. It accelerated the inevitable collapse after the weight was applied." Clara nodded slowly, a thin smile touching her lips. "Good, total honesty. That's why you pay me the big bucks, which, thanks to Mr. Hayes, you currently cannot access." She stood up, walking to her window, which overlooked a smoggy cityscape. "Here's the deal. Gregory Hayes is a big firm shark. He's not going for compensatory damages for a sunken car. Insurance will cover that. He's going for punitive damages and, more importantly, he is using the TRO to legally choke out a small business owner who embarrassed his wife. He wants to own your land." "He threatened exactly that," Elias muttered. "Right. But he made a mistake, Thorne. A fatal, classic mistake only a big firm partner makes, Overreach. Clara turned around, pointing a finger at the TRO document on the desk. This TRO cites potential environmental damage from fuel leakage as a primary reason for freezing your entire business and all assets. That is a nuclear option, and it requires immediate verifiable evidence of an ongoing environmental crisis. Elias looked confused. The fire department was there. They were worried about the oil and gas. Worry isn't proof, Thorne. They'll do an assessment. But until they do, Hayes is banking on the freeze working long enough to starve you into submission. We need to petition the court to dissolve the TRO in an emergency hearing, citing the lack of immediate environmental grounds and the irreparable harm to your livelihood. Can we beat him on that? Maybe, but we can't just defend. We have to attack! We need to show that Hayes is acting maliciously and exploiting a structural defect he knew about. Tell me again about those condo properties. Elias explained the new luxury condo complex. It was finished 6 months ago. The owners of the condo association have been harassing me about my working yard making noise and blocking their view. Clara's eyes narrowed, a predatory glint appearing. She pulled out a laptop and began typing furiously, cross-referencing public property records and ownership structures. The tension in the room ratcheted up as the machine hummed. Elias watched the clock, feeling the minutes bleed away, each one costing him his reputation and his future. After 5 tense minutes, Clara stopped typing, her gaze locked on the screen. She let out a slow, satisfied breath. "Well, Mr. Thorne," she said, the tone of her voice shifting from professional to utterly triumphant. "It seems Gregory Hayes isn't just Veronica's angry husband, and he isn't just a partner at the law firm handling the case." She turned the laptop screen toward Elias, revealing a web of corporate shell organizations and property deeds. That condo complex, the Marina Vista? The one whose residents hate your noisy, smelly little shop? The one where Veronica Hayes parked her $500,000 vehicle? Clara jabbed a finger at a highlighted name listed as the primary beneficial owner of the land and the condo association's management company. Gregory Hayes owns the entire development. And guess what? The land under your private spur and that failing cantilever dock structure? It's listed on a 20-year lease with a clause stating that Hayes's development company is responsible for all structural maintenance on that dock to ensure continued safe maritime use for the duration of the lease. Elias stared at the name, a slow, terrifying, and profoundly satisfying realization dawning. So, his wife was illegally parking on his own poorly maintained, structurally deficient property, Elias whispered. Clara leaned back, the victory in her eyes blinding. "No, Thorne. He is suing you for environmental damage and property destruction caused by his wife on his own neglected dock. He used the TRO to freeze your assets, crippling your business, with the goal of forcing you to sell your marine spur to him at a fire sale price so he can expand his development, all while concealing his own liability for the entire failing structure." She slammed her hand down on the desk, the sound a crisp crack of authority. "Hayes is suing you with his own money over his own incompetence. This isn't a parking dispute. This is a real estate hostile takeover attempt. And we just found the knife he used to try and stab you, still dripping with his own fingerprints." The powerful beat. Elias and Clara discover that Gregory Hayes is the hidden owner of the entire condo development, and the one legally responsible for the maintenance of the failing dock, exposing the TRO not as an act of legal defense, but as a malicious, cynical, hostile takeover attempt intended to steal Elias's land. The Superior Court courtroom was a sterile, unforgiving space of polished wood and muted light. Elias sat next to Clara Reed, feeling exposed in his clean but worn work jacket beside her sharp, confident presence. On the opposing table sat Gregory Hayes, immaculate in a charcoal suit, flanked not by an associate, but by a seasoned litigation partner from his own firm, a man named Mr. Harrington, whose silver hair and severe posture broadcast 50 years of expensive aggression. Hayes kept his eyes locked straight ahead, treating Elias like an unpleasant, invisible stain on the carpet. It was an emergency hearing on the motion to dissolve the temporary restraining order, TRO. Mr. Harrington started the attack, his voice smooth and contemptuous. He laid out the Hayes' case with surgical precision, painting Elias as a reckless environmental terrorist. Your Honor, we are here today because the defendant, Mr. Elias Thorne, executed a deliberate, premeditated act of structural destruction, resulting in the submersion of a six-figure asset and causing potential, ongoing environmental contamination, all because he was mildly inconvenienced by a parked car. We submit that the TRO must remain in place to protect the local environment and prevent Mr. Thorne from liquidating assets needed to cover punitive damages and the substantial cost of salvage and cleanup. Harrington produced a stack of glossy photographs. The Mercedes, half submerged, the jagged, broken timbers, a close-up of the skid marks from Elias's dolly equipment. This was not an accident of physics, Your Honor. This was vandalism with heavy machinery, compounded by witness testimony placing Mr. Thorne at the scene with a sledgehammer, actively assaulting the remaining dock structure. Elias's hands, clenched under the table, began to sweat. Hayes leaned back, a flicker of confident malice in his eyes as he finally looked at Elias. Then Clara Reed rose. She didn't approach the lectern. She stood right beside her chair, grounded and calm, a small, vibrant pillar of defiance. Your Honor, this TRO is an abuse of legal process, not an environmental defense. It is a hostile economic weapon wielded by a property developer attempting to silence and financially destroy a small, generational business owner who refused to sell his land. The courtroom murmur rose instantly. Hayes's demeanor cracked. He leaned forward, an immediate, subtle shift from smug indifference to genuine alarm. Clara continued, her voice gaining an unstoppable momentum. We are not here to debate a parking violation. Your Honor, we are here to establish that Mr. Hayes and his various corporate entities have used the structural failure of a dock that they were contractually obligated to maintain to fabricate an environmental emergency, thereby crippling Mr. Thorne's business, freezing his payroll, and creating the conditions for a hostile real estate takeover. She walked toward the bailiff, laying down two exhibits, a set of dated photos and a dense, bound document, Exhibit A. This file contains dated, time-stamped photographs and laminated notes, 3 in total, demonstrating Mrs. Hayes's repeated, long-term pattern of trespassing and blocking the only ingress-egress for South Spur Marine Works. Mr. Thorne's action was the removal of an unlawful obstruction onto the nearest available space, which happened to be a dock structure clearly rated for pedestrian traffic only. Clara paused for dramatic effect, letting the fact of Veronica's negligence sink in. But the true malice lies in Exhibit B. Your Honor, this is a 20-year lease agreement between Mr. Hayes's development company, Marina Vista Holdings, and the city. Page 14, Section 3. Subsection D, clearly states that Marina Vista Holdings is responsible for all structural integrity and routine maintenance on the South Spur access dock, including the now-failed cantilever section. A loud, abrupt cough from Mr. Harrington broke the courtroom silence. Hayes looked as though he had been struck by a physical blow, his expensive suit suddenly feeling too tight. Your Honor, Clara pressed. Mr. Hayes knew that dock was compromised. His company failed its contractual duty of maintenance for years, yet he now uses his wife's reckless parking on his own neglected property as the pretext to sue Mr. Thorne. Hayes didn't move the car. He just signed the check for the TRO. This is not about the fish. It's about the fraud. The TRO is causing immediate, irreparable harm to an honest business and must be dissolved immediately so Mr. Thorne can meet his contractual obligations. Harrington scrambled to his feet, objecting vehemently. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is making baseless accusations of fraud and injecting irrelevant and proprietary real estate data into a criminal damage complaint. Mr. Thorne admitted to using a sledgehammer. That is malicious intent, Clara countered instantly. The sledgehammer, Your Honor, is the only point Mr. Hayes has left, and Mr. Thorne will address that when he defends against the criminal charge. But it does not justify the freezing of an entire business over a structural deficiency Mr. Hayes is liable for. The TRO is a financial weapon. We respectfully ask the court to dissolve the TRO and allow Mr. Thorne to file an immediate comprehensive countersuit against Marina Vista Holdings for business interruption, negligence, and the cost of the structural repair of the access road. The judge, a silver-haired woman with a weary but sharp gaze, spent a full, tense minute reading the highlighted section of the lease agreement. The silence was thick, broken only by the scratching of her pen. She finally looked up, her gaze settling firmly on Gregory Hayes. "Mr. Harrington, while the criminal aspect of the sledgehammer must be addressed in due course, I agree with Ms. Reed. The evidence presented concerning your client's contractual obligations for dock maintenance significantly undermines the premise of environmental emergency and property defense, used to justify this highly restrictive order. The defendant's financial obligations and business reputation are being irreparably damaged by this freeze." She slammed her gavel once, a sound that cracked through the tension. "The temporary restraining order against Elias Thorne and South Spur Marine Works is hereby dissolved. All seized assets, including the $20,000 wire transfer, are to be released immediately. I further grant the defendant, Mr. Thorne, leave to file the countersuit against Marina Vista Holdings within 72 hours. This hearing is adjourned." Gregory Hayes stared across the room at Elias, his face a sudden mask of white-hot, pure hatred. His attempt to crush the small businessman in a matter of hours had failed. He had been outmaneuvered by a stack of old blueprints and his own greedy corporate paperwork. Elias had won the right to fight back. The powerful beat. The judge dissolves the crippling TRO, validating Elias's position and granting him the right to countersue, turning Gregory Hayes's calculated legal siege into a massive, self-inflicted corporate liability that will force him to defend his entire real estate empire in a public court. The afternoon sun hit the harbor water, splintering into 1,000 points of victorious light as Elias and Clara Reed walked out of the courthouse. The weight that had crushed Elias's chest since the TRO was issued lifted like a morning fog. He wasn't just safe. He was armed. "He thought he could starve you out by lunchtime," Clara said, pulling her wild red hair back with a rubber band. "That's what happens when you let your corporate ego write your legal strategy. It blindfolds you to the paperwork." Elias managed a genuine smile, the first in weeks. "Thank you, Clara. We're still facing the criminal charge, the sledgehammer, but I can breathe now. We'll address the criminal charge by offering a public service plea. Pay a fine, admit to reckless behavior, but deny malicious intent. We have the leverage now." Hayes is terrified of discovery on the negligence suit. "You, Elias, are about to put his whole Marina Vista Holdings development under a microscope." The next 72 hours were a blur of frenetic relief and preparation. Elias's assets were unfrozen. The $20,000 wire transfer hit his account. He paid his employees, called Mr. Chen to apologize for the delay, and got his equipment released. South Spur Marine Works roared back to life, but the victory was a sharp edge against Gregory Hayes. Hayes, humiliated and cornered, retaliated with predictable fury. The next morning, a city inspector arrived, demanding to see documentation for every piece of equipment, citing an anonymous complaint about unlicensed ballast material. An hour later, the electric company showed up, claiming they had a work order to inspect the main line that powered the hydraulic lift, threatening a temporary shutoff. Hayes was leveraging every favor and connection he had to create friction, chaos, and delay. Elias fought back, armed with Clara's instructions. He politely handed the inspector copies of the blueprints, the same ones that implicated Hayes. And he pointed out to the power crew that the only access point they could use was the structurally unsound cantilever dock, which Hayes's company was responsible for maintaining. The power crew chief, sensing the coming legal explosion, backed off immediately. Meanwhile, in their sprawling penthouse overlooking the water, the Hayes household was a portrait of escalating domestic disaster. Gregory was shouting into his phone, destroying the furniture with the force of his pacing. "I don't care what the judge said, Harrington. Stop him! File an immediate appeal! I need those documents locked down! If that dock maintenance clause goes public, my liability on the entire development, the seawall, the pilings, everything, goes critical." Veronica, who had been hiding in the kitchen, emerged, clutching a wine glass. She was frayed, her entitlement curdling into genuine fear. "But Gregory, my jewelry box. It was under the passenger seat." The Cartier watch, the emerald necklace, they're still in the car. We have to get the salvage crew out there now! Gregory slammed the phone down. The salvage crew? Are you insane, Veronica? We can't touch that car! It's the primary evidence in a pending lawsuit, a lawsuit I filed. If we pull it out, we risk disturbing the environmental assessment before the city is through. And more importantly, the longer it sits, the more it looks like Elias's negligent act, not my company's deficient structure. That car is an anchor for my defense.
An anchor?
It's $500,000 of my property, and it's filled with my grandmother's jewelry, she shrieked. I don't care about your lawsuits, Gregory. I want my things. The tension snapped. Gregory turned on her, his face dark with genuine contempt. Your things? Your idiotic, selfish need to park wherever you wanted has handed that dock rat a key to my company's balance sheets. You have no idea what you've done, Veronica. You are the catalyst for this entire disaster. He stormed out, leaving Veronica alone, her reflection shimmering in the cold glass of the balcony door. Fueled by wine, self-pity, and an overwhelming sense of unjust deprivation, a single toxic thought solidified in her mind. She would retrieve the jewelry herself. Dusk was settling over the harbor. Elias was in his workshop reviewing the countersuit documents when he heard a faint, persistent, metallic sound echoing from the water. He walked quickly to the end of his private spur. The tide was out, the water low enough to fully expose the ruined dock structure and, chillingly, the nearly complete roof and windshield of Veronica's Mercedes. A small, inflatable dinghy, one of the Marina Vista residents kept tucked away, was tied to a remaining piling, and in the water, wading up to her thighs in the dark, cold muck of the low tide, was Veronica Hayes. She was wearing flimsy neoprene water shoes and a pair of white jeans, ruined by the oily seawater. She had a crowbar and was frantically trying to pry open the back door of the sunken Mercedes. Stop! Veronica, what in God's name are you doing? Elias shouted, adrenaline spiking. She ignored him, straining against the water's suction and the crumpled metal. I need my things. I'm getting my things back. This is my property. That's a crime scene. And that dock is unstable. Get out of the water now! Elias ran to the edge of the working dock. Just as he reached the line, Veronica managed to force the crowbar into a large crack in the rear window, a window that had been shattered when the car hit the pilings. She pulled hard. The movement sent a shudder through the entire wreck, which was still half supported by the remaining structural timber of the collapsed dock. She pulled out a waterlogged leather box, a triumphant, desperate cry escaping her lips. But the victory was momentary. The shifting weight of the car, combined with the stress she applied, finally defeated the last remaining, weakened timber beam that had been holding the vehicle in a precarious balance. With a deep, sickening crack, the final timber gave way. The Mercedes did not just sink. It pitched violently forward, the front end plunging deep into the soft, tidal silt. The resulting displacement of water created a powerful, localized surge of current that violently knocked Veronica off her feet. She screamed, not a sound of rage or entitlement, but one of pure, helpless terror as she was swept against the jagged, splintered edge of the dock ruin. The crowbar slipped from her hand and plunged into the murky depths. Elias didn't hesitate. He grabbed the thickest rope from his nearby boat and plunged into the freezing water. He reached her seconds later, pulling her, panicked and gasping, away from the wreckage and back toward the safety of his spur. They collapsed on the wood. Veronica was shivering, her jeans shredded and her ankle twisted. Her jewelry box floated away, its contents already lost to the depths. You saved me, she choked out, the word tasting like bile. Elias was too exhausted to respond with anything but harsh reality. Your car is now completely buried, Veronica. And you just contaminated the entire area with whatever you disturbed. Your need for your jewelry just turned a half-sunk liability into a full-scale environmental hazard. As the final light of day bled out, the irony was complete. Elias had won the legal battle and had physically saved his antagonist. But the car, the entire genesis of the conflict, was now completely lost, a monument to Veronica's unstoppable negligence. The next morning, the city, alerted to the severe environmental damage caused by the secondary collapse, issued a definitive statement. The dock was declared a total loss. But crucially, The city investigation found that the primary cause of the initial structural failure was the known long-term degradation of the support timbers, placing 100% of the financial burden for the site's structural repair and the environmental cleanup directly onto the entity legally responsible for maintenance. Marina Vista Holdings. Gregory Hayes's attempt to crush Elias Thorne had resulted in his wife losing her car, his company losing its defense, and Hayes himself being forced to pay millions to clean up and rebuild the public access dock for the very community he was trying to exploit. The powerful beat. Veronica's selfish attempt to retrieve her jewelry causes the final, catastrophic structural collapse, which in turn seals Gregory Hayes's corporate doom by forcing the city to definitively rule his company responsible for the entire dock, failure and subsequent environmental cleanup, delivering the ultimate financial and karmic justice.